After all of that shilling, all that attempts at gaslighting you into thinking that Xbox Game Pass was the future, that it was the most affordable way to play games, that this was some huge monumental success story, that it was such a great way to expand your library and play games you had never heard of, something that was supposed to be great for Xbox first party and indie games alike. X Xbox Game Pass was supposed to be the most pro consumer service on the market. $15 a month and you get to play everything on the service. That was the narrative. It was so much better than Nintendo Switch Online with its back catalog of the best games ever made. No, like Xbox will was charging you $15 for a bunch of games that you could buy at a lower price point on sale. So again, the Xbox Game Pass thing was always a cope, especially because we all knew where it would inevitably lead. We all knew how this would end up, and we're now at that point. We have now reached the tipping point of Xbox Game Pass's official failure. They have raised the prices to $30 a month, twice as high as it was a couple of years ago. You are now expected to pay $30 a month for access to games that would be cheaper if you just straight up bought them. There is no reason to pay for Xbox Game Pass. There is no benefit to it. There is no reason to do it. Like, if you're going to play games on Xbox, just pay for the games you want to play and don't bother with the online subscription service. But that isn't something that anybody is going to be willing to do. I'm sure the big Xbox shills, people like Angry Joe, people like that, they're going to make all kinds of gigantic copes about this situation. They're going to do everything they possibly can to try and write off all of the very real problems with this service, all the while downplaying the vastly superior Nintendo Switch Online service, which includes things like Game Chat, which includes online play, which includes Nintendo Classics, which leads up to GameCube. I've been saying for a long time that Nintendo Switch Online far surpasses Xbox Game Pass. $20 a year for classic games. Okay, 50 if you're going for the expansion pack. Which is significantly more cheaper than Xbox Game Pass was even before the price hikes. I have been maintaining that Nintendo has dominated with the superior online service for years, but the giant cope among the community is that nobody wants to play old Nintendo games, that Nintendo Switch Online is pointless because of pirated games on emulation, that Nintendo has no business competing in this space, that they should just go third party and stop producing new hardware because Xbox Game Pass is the future. That's something we were told a lot when the Game Pass service first premiered. It was supposed to be this huge monumental thing, and it never really took off, in spite of YouTubers constantly doing everything they possibly could to shill this as some major thing for Xbox, because it does need to be said that the Xbox console brand is over, right? They are phasing out the console. They are going full tilt on this service. This is the future of their brand. They are never again going to produce a full on Xbox console because they want to turn the brand into a service. And in doing so, they are in the process of raising their prices, eliminating the plastic box that just takes up space, and having its fans just relentlessly just shill the idea. Xbox Game Pass is going to be a service that's on every major platform. It's going to be on TVs. It's going to be on PlayStation. It's going to be on Nintendo. And there's just no real reason for that to happen, right? Why would I pay 30 bucks a month for a console when I could just for a game library service, when I could just buy the games outright and just enjoy it? Like, you can buy Hollow Knight or Silksong for a lower price point than 1 month of Xbox Game Pass. What benefit does the service give the consumer? And this is a really good example, I think, of just how the terms pro-consumer and anti-consumer are just weaponized against Nintendo specifically, because you are not gonna hear a peep out of the community in regards to these price hikes. Like, again, we saw this with, like, the Xbox and PlayStation price hikes where nobody cared at all, versus the Switch One price hikes, which everyone just kind of screamed about, even though the Switch 2 was not affected by any price hikes at all. So the double standards have always been very palpable when it comes to, like, Nintendo versus Xbox. Xbox, which is run by an evil corporation, led by a billionaire that legit wants to uh, change the way we consume meat, versus Nintendo, which just wants to produce good video games. People pretend Microsoft is good and that Bill Gates is trying to save the world from climate change, versus Nintendo, who are, supposedly evil and the most greedy corporation in existence. It's a giant Coke. It really is odd how people present Nintendo as being one of the most evil corporations in the industry when Microsoft constantly ushers in things that would not have been possible in a Nintendo dominated market. Like, they were the ones that introduced Horse Armor DLC in Oblivion. Where is the outrage over that? Like, why are people not acknowledging that Microsoft was behind so many of the toxic practices that are still used today? They If it wasn't for PlayStation and Microsoft, like, DLC and just the microtransactions would never have been as normalized as they are. Like, Nintendo was very adamantly against that stuff for a long time, but because, like, they became so mainstream and because people were genuinely asking about DLC, that we started getting it. But and of course Nintendo's DLC is way higher quality than the competition's, but it does need to be said more often that, like, Microsoft, like, and what they've been doing with Game Pass, like, was always going to end in a complete disaster. There is no getting around it, is that there was no redeeming quality to the service at all. It did not do anything good for developers. It did not do anything for consumers. And in the end, it's not even going to be a successful service. So why then were so many people adamant that Xbox Game Pass was going to be some monumental success story for the brand? This was supposed to be the major success of Xbox. This was supposed to be the future of Xbox. This was supposed to be the biggest online service in the world, and yet it's being eclipsed by Nintendo Switch Online, a service that offers more features at a more affordable price, $50 a year versus $30 a month. Like, again, and not only that, but the games on Nintendo Switch Online are far better. They're older games that people actually want to play. So, with that in mind, Xbox Game Pass really does need to be condemned more in the gaming community. This kind of thing is not an isolated incident. It is going to get worse. It is going to get more expensive, and people are going to continue making excuses for it and continuing to put up this facade that this is some huge success story and that Xbox is going to have some glorious, like, comeback. It's not going to happen. Xbox at this stage is a completely dead brand.